and you see a recording here moving. It's like going in circles. So my hope is that this is actually, now it's being recorded. You see, now it turned red. So welcome, welcome once more. Glad to see you all. Glad that we are all here. So let me just briefly wave at you. Welcome. Welcome to my home. It's nice that we have some way of, resuming teaching activities. So I will now introduce you to the course. So the main thing about, let's say, the course is, of course, that we have these lectures online and we have practice classes online, but everything that we do will actually be available in our website. So let me show you the website. So it should be here, I think. Yeah, this is the presentation. So in the presentation, I listed the website. It's very simple, actually, when you think about it, but wait, I have to find the right slide. So it should, this is the site. sites.google.com/FFUNSACRS. So you see, it's Google Sites, site.google.com. Our faculty, that's the domain of our faculty, historical-linguistics. For some reason, it didn't allow me to create historical linguistics as a single word, and it didn't allow me to put a dot there, so I opted for the hyphen. So this is what the site looks like right now. Let me just change to my primary screen. You should see now my browser. So it's a very simple site. This is the Tower of Babel, when all languages, according to the Bible, were identical. There were no other languages, just a single human language. Then God got envious and confused our languages. So this is, right now you have only 3 items in the Google Drive. One is Introduction to Historical Linguistics 2020. It should read syllabus, but it's the same syllabus. And you have obligatory reading 1 and 2. So this obligatory reading 1 and 2, these are the PDFs with relevant parts of different books so that you can, read them without having to physically go to the library and take that. They are mostly scanned books and scanned chapters. I will tell you, you don't need a lot of that, only some small sections. So let me open the Introduction to Historical Linguistics and let me introduce you to the course. You should be able to see my browser window. So at least, although the name of the document is not the same, it's not correct. This is correct. So this is for this academic year. So this is an introductory course. We are not doing anything very complex here. This is simply so that by the end of the course, you will have gained understanding of various factors that influence language change. So you will be aware of things that cause language change. We will not go into detail. So this is like a big picture, the overview from 10,000 feet. And you will know how these factors operate with the focus on the English language, because this is the study of English language. So we don't expect any pre-existing knowledge. To just know about basic phonology and phonetics. So I heard something. Milan Ležaja, outside faculty of philosophy, wants to join. Milan, welcome. I admitted you in. Hope you are now online. I was just presenting the course. So if it's blurry, it's Google Meet. I cannot do anything about that. I saw the message. My internet is very good. I do also online classes. for the first year, also using Google Meet, and that's generally good. So if there is some blurriness, unfortunately, that's Google Meet. It's beyond my control. So the biggest issue that we have in this course right now is, of course, the elephant in the room, the COVID. So instead of 15 weeks or maybe 12 weeks in the worst case scenario, that's the normal duration of the semester, we have 9 weeks, counting this one. So this is more or less the course schedule. So today we have the intro, and I will not be able to finish it momentarily because, as I said, we only have 9 weeks. So this is like a condensed schedule. It's somewhat different when we have 12 or 15 weeks. So today you will hear the intro, general info, and this is already enough for the first question in the written exam. I will show you the written exam. I didn't include it in the presentation today. I will do it next week. But fundamentally, each of these topics, general info, language families, phonology, sociology and language change, analogical change, borrowing, semantic change, grammatical change, we never put it in the exam. It's just for your information that it's given here. It's really complex, and contact-induced change. So these are like the topics addressed in the final exam, and each of these questions, each of these topics is represented by one or maybe two questions. So you have a total of actually 9 questions. So analogy is usually covered by more than one question. And even today, what we do today will be enough for like 15 or 15% of your final exam grade. So that's actually our schedule. So we will start today with the intro. Next week we'll talk about language families. This is another question. Then we'll talk about phonology and sound changes. That's actually 2 questions in the written exam. Sociological change, that's 1 question. Analogical change, 2 questions. Borrowing and semantic change, it's 1 question combined. Grammatical change, nothing, and contact-induced change, 1 or 2 questions, and that's it. So when we do the course wrap-up on December the 22nd, we will do one of the previous exams together. You will see at the end of the course how you should answer it. And in order to boost your grade, we have 2 assignments. So one will be given to you on November the 3rd when we finish sound changes, and you should do it by November the 22nd. And then I will give you another assignment on December the 8th when we finish grammatical change. And that one you have to finish by the beginning of the January examination period. And those 2 assignments give you 7.5% each. So that's together 15%, and the final exam is 90%. So the mathematics is correct here. So theoretically, you can score 105, but nobody does the written exam 100% accurate. So this way, we ensure that, for example, if you do the written exam for the grade of 9, you get a 10, because this extra 5% boosts your final grade. If you do it for, like a very weak 8, thanks to the extra grade, you can still get a 9. And this works always. So the only thing that you have to do is do the assignment number 1 and assignment number 2, which is just pass or fail. So you have to try hard to fail, because they are really nice assignments. They are about 1 or 2 pages where you do a small scale task on a particular topic. So something about language family, and something about borrowing. So two separate topics. You can ask your previous generations, they will tell you you can do it in an afternoon, and it's actually interesting. You do a little bit of investigation in online sources. I give you the links, and you create, for example, a family tree of a word in several languages. You draw this nice family tree. You can make it personal, creative. I will show you when the time comes how some previous generations did it for different words. And then you do something similar for, let's say, borrowing or analogical change. You can use Serbian examples as well. So no, I can tell you that actually not nobody, but over the last 3 years, only 3 people failed to pass these assignments, and that's because they never showed up in lectures, they never showed up in practice classes, and they sent something that was meaningless. But except for those, really couple of people, everybody else gets these 15 extra points. And I don't want to go into e-zaposleni, but the pass rate in this course is really nice. And also most people get really nice grades, 8s, 9s, 10s. We rarely have a 7 a long time ago. So that's it when it comes to the grading principle. So written exam plus these extra credit assignments that can give you half a grade. This is the site. I already introduced you to it. So before I go further and start maybe talking about, not maybe, definitely, because you only have 9 weeks, about the course and the topic of the course itself, the screen is yours. Unmute yourselves. Questions, comments in Serbian, in English. Just don't make it in German or something like that. Okay. I'm ready. See, I'm waiting. I'm smiling. Don't be afraid. Ask.
There are messages for you in.
There are messages.
Yeah.
You don't want to talk. Dobroveče, blurry screens. Will the presentations be uploaded to the website? Oh, sorry, I cannot see all these things because I'm presenting. So now I change windows. Yes, all the presentations will be uploaded to the website. Even this presentation will be uploaded after the class. Ne vidi i ne čuje se ništa iako sam u pozivu. Pa to je problem sa Google Meetom. Ali ta osoba me nažalost ne čuje, Jovana Stojadinović. Be that as it may, recite Jovani ili ja ću da odgovorim, Jovana. Biće sve snimljeno. Probajte Win 10 i Google Chrome. Ako je, recimo, ovaj Google Meet ne radi nekad na Windowsu 7 i voli Google Chrome, ako koristite Edge, Firefox ili sektaški Safari na macOS-u, onda nekad neće da radi. Da, vidim, pa to baš nije dobro, taj Google Meet nas baš zeza. Dobro, ali čujete barem moj glas, to je nešto. U svakom slučaju ovo se snima, pa je moja nada da će biti sve lepo snimljeno. Ok, ajde onda da pređemo na predavanje, a ovi tehnički problemi, znači evo, ovo je prvi put da se žalimo na Google Meet. Do sad je radio lepo. Ako sledeći put opet ne bude radio, onda ću da moram da pređem na neku drugu platformu, ali nadam se da će sve lepo da radi. Sad, let me go back to the lecture desk. You should see the presentation now, I hope. These are the topics for today. What is historical linguistics? How did it come to be? who created it, what were the early theories. So there are like 5 questions that theoretically you can get in the written exam. And so one of the first questions could be, what is historical linguistics? So out of these possibilities, if somebody wants to give it a shot, unmute yourselves and say whether it's A, B, C, or D. A is study of the history of linguistics, B is study of sound change, C is study of language change, D is study of language evolution if your screen is still frozen. So, any volunteers? Anybody?
I'll go with D.
That's very modern, but that's more than historical linguistics. Language evolution is actually a new study that is based on historical linguistics, but historical linguistics is actually just study of language change. Study of language evolution uses historical linguistics data combined with DNA analysis and some other, scientific branches to actually try to figure out how languages evolved. What we are studying is in historical linguistics is actually data that people studying language evolution use to create models of how languages evolved. So I already presented to you the course, so I will skip those slides. So there are fundamentally only let's say 4, some people say 5 main concerns of historical linguistics. So these are those, let's say, 5 topics or questions that are answered by historical linguistics, and that you can get asked in the first question of the written exam. So the main concern of historical linguistics is to observe, describe, and account for changes in a particular language or in particular languages. So I will I have some slides, but I actually want to show you how this observation, description, and accounting actually works. So language actually contains history. Every day that we talk, sometime unknowingly we are using words that tell stories from hundreds or thousands of years ago. So I will now present you with my primary screen. I hope you can see it. It should be the photo of Amazon.com. I hope you can see it. Somebody can unmute and say, yes, we see Amazon.com.
It's very blurry.
Don't worry. It won't be blurry in the recording. I hope. Because, the Google let me explain. Our faculty is relatively financially challenged. So we are not paying for Google Apps for Education. We have a special Google Apps for Education package that is free. But one of the problems with the free, let's say, accounts is that universities with free accounts do not have 4K and high definition streaming. So I set this meeting to be full HD, 1080 pixels. But it's possible that despite that, the reason why it's so blurry is that Google is compressing it. If that's really the case, it's unfortunate. But hey, we cannot do anything about Google, and we don't have enough money to buy Zoom. Zoom could work better, but after the first 2 meetings, it will stop working after 45 minutes if we don't pay, which is a bit inconvenient. So I'll see. But if it ends up blurring the recording, then I would have to say that I am bitterly disappointed in Google. So in the blurry image, which may be not so blurry if I zoom, so there's a book by Bill Bryson. I don't know if you've read it, but if you haven't, it's warmly recommended. It's a very nice story about how American English became different from British English and how American English became the identity of the, I mean, identifying feature of the new American nation. But at the very beginning of the book, there's a nice story which shows you how actually historical linguistics can tell you about contexts and events from distant past. So let me open the next slide. I will again zoom it. If you can't read it, this is from the first page of Made in America. It says, in the 1940s, a British traveler to Anholt, a small island 50 miles out in the Kattegat Strait between Denmark and Sweden, noticed that the island children sang a piece of doggerel that was clearly nonsense to them, to the children. So that song was Jack og Jill went up the hill, og Jill come tumbling after. Now, of course, if you know English and if you teach children English, I know that many of you work remotely for Chinese, Taiwanese, Thailandese, Japanese learners of English. You know that this is the nursery rhyme. Jack and Jill went up the hill, and so on, and Jack came tumbling after. So what this means, here it's explained. This ditty was brought to the island by occupying British soldiers during the Napoleonic Wars. And children, without actually speaking English, learned it in a completely distorted form, not completely, but rather distorted form, so that 130 years later, it was just something you memorize, but actually has no meaning in the Danish community that doesn't speak English. They speak Danish, of course. So that's actually this example where you see that historical linguistics tells you the story of what was happening many, many years ago. And many things that we use every day have stories to tell about, what happened 500 years ago. For example, another nursery rhyme, you probably know this. It's the most famous. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. What does it mean? Any ideas? I can zoom it. It says eeny, meeny, miny, mo, which can be spelled in a number of ways, is a children's counting rhyme used to select a person in games such as tag. It has existed in various forms since well before 1820, and so on. But what does it mean? How did it come to be? Well, this is, for example, an evidence, a piece of evidence that English speakers were in contact with Celtic speakers. If you dig deep, you learn that in Cornish, and the Cornish language is a Celtic language that was spoken in the British Isles even in Roman times and before Roman times, so BC. The nursing rhyme in Cornish goes ena, mena, mona, meet, bascalora, bora, beat, huga, buka, bow, and then it switches to English. But this is the modern version of this Cornish folk song. The original version contained no English words. So for example, in this "eeny, meeny, miny, mo," you cannot imagine anything more Anglo-Saxon than "eeny, meeny, miny, mo," and it's actually not Anglo-Saxon; it's Celtic. So this is a good example of what I was talking about, that historical linguistics, and now you should see my presentation, hopefully. Again, probably blurry, and I apologize, although it's not within my control. But so the concern of historical linguistics is exactly this: to observe, to describe, and account for changes in a particular language or particular languages. So sometimes these are not these interesting stories how, for example, English and Celtic languages were in contact and how this influenced nursery rhymes, so that the counting rhymes do not contain Anglo-Saxon words. Sometimes it's more serious. For example, one of the changes is that in this course you will learn and you will understand why we have do support. For example, in English, in the old days, you didn't ask like, did you write this yourself? You used the same construction you would use in Serbian. You would ask like, da li si ti to napisao? So here you have an example. In the 11th century, you would have said something like, believest thou this thing? That means, believe you this thing? Do you believe this thing? And 5 centuries later, the structure of the language is completely different. Out of the blue, did and do appear. No reason, it seems. Most linguistics books will tell you it was a new development from the 16th century, but actually there is an explanation. And historical linguistics, through the analysis of language contact, changes in other languages, and how these languages were, mingling, we can actually explain this, and you'll be surprised actually what the source of this do really is. It's a well-kept secret that English Anglo-Saxon linguists that are proud of the Anglo-Saxon heritage, they don't want to talk about this, but it's actually very interesting. Then there's another concern of historical linguistics that is now, let's say, not so hot as a topic. So we will only mention it, but we will not really do it. So this concern is reconstructing of the prehistory of languages and determining the relatedness, grouping languages into language families. So the reason why we're not doing this is that if you go online, you will find dictionaries of reconstructed Proto-Indo-European language roots. And you will, wherever you go on Google, Bing, Yahoo, Baidu, if you use Chinese websites, you will see family trees of all language families and languages in general. So, in other words, we are standing on shoulders of giants. There's nothing new to actually do here. This is what we have. And actually, these language roots and these reconstructed roots are sometimes the training sets that evolutionary linguists use to test their models of language evolution and language development. So this area of historical linguistics deals with language relatedness. At that time, you remember, this was 18th and 19th century when historical linguistics was, being formed as a distinct branch of linguistics. That was the period of nationalism throughout the world. It was the period of blood and soil nationalism. Nation countries were being created. Germany was just being turned into Germany, not, like many small dukes who speak the German language. They were creating the German nation, and similar things were happening throughout the world, like also in Serbia, that's the period of turmoil and etc. So because of that, a lot of effort was put into determining like who is who, čiji si ti mali, od kog si ti roda, s kim si povezan, ko ti je brat od tetke. To je otprilike bila logika. So this today is not so important, and it's even politically incorrect in some ways, but for historical reasons I have to mention to you some early comparative linguists who gave birth to historical linguistics. So the most important person, who is considered to be the father of not only comparative but actually historical linguistics, is William Jones. Now, William Jones, he looks like a very romantic, tormented young soul. He died young, by the way. He was a British jurist. He was a lawyer in a way, who worked in India. So he was not a linguist in any sense, you know, he was just a young, very, let's say, ambitious British, you know, colonial worker who was given a task. And he was given a task of organizing some historical documents and comparing the translations of British legal documents into the languages spoken in India, because at that time very few people in India spoke English. Nowadays it's much better. And then as he was comparing these, you know, documents, and he was also comparing them with other legal documents written at the time, still some things were written in Latin and many things were written in French, he noticed that Sanskrit is very similar in its structure to European languages. Now, this is probably blurry, so I will read it out for you. He said, the Sanskrit language, whatever his antiquity, listen to political incorrectness, the language is not it, it is he. So the Sanskrit language, whatever his antiquity, is of wonderful structure, more perfect than the Greek, more copious than the Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either, yet bearing to both of them a strong affinity, both in the roots of verbs and in the other forms of grammar, than could possibly have been produced by accident. That part of the sentence, that part where he says, bearing to both of them strong affinity than could have possibly been produced by accident. That moment when he wrote it in the 18th century, that was the birth of historical linguistics. And then he continued, so strong indeed, this affinity, this similarity, in other words, that no philologer could examine them all three, Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit, without believing them to have sprung from some common source, which perhaps no longer exists. And this quotation is one of the most common quotations in linguistics, because this is the foundation of modern linguistics. So all branches of linguistics that you know today, fundamentally they developed from these early efforts in the 18th century to established the relatedness of languages. And then they started looking at vocabulary, they started looking at grammar, they started looking at phonology and phonetics, they started analyzing the change in meanings of sentences. So it is from historical linguistics and this blood and soil nationalism among linguists to determine which languages are brothers and which languages are not brothers. This is what gave us syntax, semantics, phonology, phonetics. Of course, now this is completely divorced. But in the early days, those were just parts of the analysis in historical linguistics. Now, there is usually a question in the written exam: who is the founder of historical linguistics and why? So in that case, you would say William Jones, British jurist in India, is the founding father of historical linguistics, because in the 18th century he expressed for the first time the idea that Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit are related, and that this similarity is not an accident, but exists because they develop from the same common source. So you write 2 or 3 sentences and voila, 15 points out of 100 already. Sometimes the question in the written exam is about other early comparative linguists, but now you will hear about another person that you should be familiar with. So one of the early comparative linguists, and an early historical linguist, that is Jacob Grimm. So when Jacob was not busy with his brother collecting fairy tales, he was actually analyzing different languages: Greek, Sanskrit, Latin, French, German, Old Norse, the language of the Vikings, even Old English. So Jacob was actually a linguist, but he would not call himself a linguist. He was like a phonologist. He was a philologist interested in history. And he is the person who gave us the first big law that explains how Germanic languages became different from other Indo-European languages. So this is known actually as Grimm's law. So Jacob Grimm gave us Grimm's law. This is actually the explanation why German languages are phonologically different. So in Latin you would say pitar, or sorry, that's Sanskrit. In Sanskrit you say pitar. In Latin you say pater. But in German you say father. So it's not p, it is f. And the same applies to t, which became th, and k, which became actually, you can see it here in the slide, although I'm not sure if it can really, if it's blurry, but k became h. So this is Grimm's law. Nobody noticed that. And to this very day, we don't have the explanation. So that's another thing which is still missing. When I mentioned that there is very little that can be done in terms of this relatedness research, well, there is work to be done in explaining some of these changes. To this very day, nobody can explain why this happened. In a way, this sounds really weird. It's as if somebody with a speech defect gave his language to the whole nation. Why did they suddenly stop saying pater and they started saying father? It's a small change, but nonetheless, why? You don't do that normally. So this is another comparative linguist or historical linguist. So you could get a question in the written exam: why is Jacob Grimm important in the development of historical linguistics? And you would say that his importance is there. That Jacob Grimm is important because he formulated the second law regarding the change of consonants in Germanic language, which explains how Germanic languages became different from other Indo-European languages in terms of their phonology. In particular, the consonants p, t, and k. Then there are many other early historical or comparative linguists that we will simply go through very quickly. So August Schleicher is important because he was influenced by Darwin. He was a big fan of Darwin, and he actually then introduced the main ideas of Darwin's theory of evolutions, Darwin's theory of species, and his importance in historical linguistics is that he saw language as a living organism that grows and develops. And it is August who gave us the idea of a family tree of languages. So you have some common ancestor from which other languages developed. And he is the first one who introduced the idea of a proto-language. So in terms of all Indo-European languages, the idea that there is one proto-Indo-European language, one Indo-European language from which all other Indo-European languages developed, you have to thank August Schleicher, who died again relatively young in 1861. So his ideas was the family tree of languages and the proto-language. And he was the first person who introduced those reconstructed forms. Then there are many linguists that we will really quickly go through, and partially that's because they are both not so important for the development of historical linguistics, and partially because you maybe do this in other courses in your studies. These were neo-grammarians, a group of German Indo-Europeanists. They were analyzing Indo-European languages. Karl Brugmann, Karl Werner, and I forgot the name of Paul. I cut it off, sorry. What they are important, the reason why they're important is that they actually introduced laws in the study of historical linguistics. So they didn't call them laws, they called them principles. So they actually are the first historical linguists that tried to formulate the rules of language change. So some of them, their ideas were really weird. Some of them were partially correct. Some are forgotten, but they are still remembered for their enthusiasm, because they believe not only that you can formulate rules of language change, they also thought that the only way to study language is to study the history of languages, which we know is not correct, but they were really enthusiastic about it. So this gives us actually the insight into the third main concern of historical linguistics. So one of the questions could be list the main concerns of historical linguistics. In that case, you would have mentioned, so for example, so establishing the relatedness among languages, documenting, and explaining the changes between languages. And the third one would be develop general theories about why language changes. And that is still ongoing. So in this respect, historical linguistics over the last 20 years gave birth to its very successful, let's say, baby, which is sociolinguistics or historical sociolinguistics. More and more, historical linguists became aware that it's not simply sound changes that neo-grammarians were talking about, that actually in many, many cases, most of the time, what influences the change of language is actually sociological or let's say events in the language community, so changes in the society, how, who is the dominant nation in a country, what is the dominant dialect in that country, is this country starting to cooperate more and more with one of its neighbors. And these things, these sociological, let's say, factors can explain many, many phenomena that cannot be explained by simply looking at phonology or grammar. So historical linguistics is at the basis of historical sociolinguistics, and many of the ideas of historical linguistics are already incorporated in sociolinguistics. Because historical linguistics was the first to become aware of the importance of sociological factors in the development of languages. But because we are at university, I also have a very unpleasant task to introduce you to some early theories of language change. Virtually all of them are abandoned. They are usually silly, or they are very offensive and politically incorrect. But since we are at a university, it is my duty and obligation to keep an open mind and introduce you to some weird ideas that people had about why languages change. So one of the first theories was climatic or geographical determinism. Believe it or not, people had the idea that, for example, if you live in a hilly area, mountainous area, you are constantly, tired because you are moving up the mountain or you're moving down the mountain. So you puff a lot, you breathe heavily, and those languages in mountainous regions therefore have a lot of fricatives. That was a theory, believe it or not. We now know it's wrong. But that, I'm just showing you some really weird ideas, and so it was an uphill battle to prove that this theory was correct. The most embarrassing of all theories, which of course was discarded very early on, but for historical reasons, again, we have to mention it because it was the dominant theory for a couple of decades, was something terrible. I'm really ashamed that I'm showing you this slide, but for historical reasons we have to do it. It was racial and anatomical determination. So believe it or not, the explanation in the 19th century for the phonology of African languages was that people from Africa have a strange shape of their lips. So the reason why African languages have clicks and other, they called it weird sounds, is the shape of African, not African American, but really African nations. Those people, of course, did not live to see the 21st century, where they would then have to change their theories when they see people in Hollywood that pay huge money to do Botox and other beauty interventions. So this is a terrible theory. There were some theories that actually kind of made sense, but they had to be severely and significantly modified. These were theories about etiquette, social conventions, and cultural traits. For example, there are some languages that do not have labial phonemes. They really have no phonemes that you produce by visibly moving your lips, labial phonemes. These are languages spoken by some Native American tribes, like that's Iroquoian languages, Iroquois in Serbian, Iroquoian languages. The only exception are the Cherokee languages. And they thought that the absence of labial consonants was because the cultural heritage of these Native American tribes was that it was inappropriate to close the lips. They always wanted to, in a way, smile. But again, we know that etiquette and social conventions are important, but we now know that they do not actually influence the phonological system of a language. Then some other theories were about indolence. For example, there were theories that young people are too lazy to pronounce and use language properly, that they are rebellious and they on purpose try to destroy the beauty of the language of previous generations, and that was a theory, indolence of young people. We now know that actually young people are drivers of the language change, but they don't do it because of indolence. Young people are innovators, and they actually produce new innovative forms in the language that serve the purpose of social identification. You know that, when you are a certain age, you use words that are different from the words that your parents use. That's a part of your, let's say, identification with your group. But that also changes your language, in the sense that when you become a parent, you pass on some of this vocabulary, expressions, or new structures to your kids, and then your kids start using it normally, and this becomes a new innovation or new thing, a language change. Other theories talked about ease and simplification, which is actually correct. Many sound changes in particular, not all language changes, but sound changes in particular, happen so that you can articulate something more easily, or sometimes something that is complex gets simplified, because language is like simplicity, efficiency, and uniformity. So language is generally like things to be regular, straightforward, and very few exceptions. So this actually is relatively okay as a theory, but not for all language changes. And finally, this is another early theory that is actually valid. Foreign influence is usually very important, not necessarily in a negative way. So early historical linguists thought that foreign influence is a negative thing. And in Serbia, you still have some people who claim that, heavy borrowing is a terrible thing. If you look at the history of English, you will see that more than 70% of English vocabulary is actually not English. It's Latin, Greek, and French, mostly French. So borrowing can actually increase the richness of the vocabulary available to the native speakers of a particular language. And there is no language except English where you can, have very fine differences in meanings. For example, question, inquire, or inquisit, like inquisitive mind. So this all happened because of borrowing. So we now know that foreign influence is an important thing, but it's not negative. It's actually something that you should not look upon as something, terrible. It's just normal. It's not terrible. It's normal. It should just, be encoded in language manuals. And this is why, for example, in Blitz, you can see things like Tom Waits tribute band, Rain Dogs with, wrong inverted commas, u Gun klubu. That's Serbian these days. And if you think this is happening only in Serbian, you're wrong. For example, this is a book from Amazon. It's called Come In and Burn Out, Denglish, Their Survival Guide. It's about the new version of English and German. They call it Denglish. So this is German, Deutsch. That's why it's called Denglish. But it's actually Deutsch, German, which is mostly, using English words. For example, today, if you go looking for a job in Germany, you are looking for ein Job. Ich möchte einen Job finden. You don't say Arbeit, which is the German word. You say job. And for example, the word for a cell phone in Germany is ein Handy. Handy, of course, is not the first word which you would use in English to talk about a cell phone, but comes from English. And for example, if you watch Formula One races in German, they have the best commentators. They will say ein toller pit stop. Pit crew hat ein excellent job gemacht. So this is like 30% English these days. And there's another theory of language change which said that language changes because people want to do social climbing. So people imitate the language of the higher society, let's say, group, and look down upon languages of lower groups in the society. And this is actually true, for example, in English, you know, that you say, you know, you have a pig and you deal with, you know, excrement, you deal with mud and the smell of the pigs if you're, you know, working on a farm. But if you're a lord, you don't eat a pig, you eat pork. So you see, in English, you have examples that, you know, the higher and the lower groups in the society can introduce different vocabulary. So ordinary people in the 13th century, they only cared about pigs, but they couldn't afford to eat pigs. But people who could eat pigs, they didn't deal with the dirty job of keeping pigs. They only ate the meats, and they called it the French word, the word, you know, the language of fine cuisine and culture, and that's why you ended up with pork. So this is true, but again, this is not a universal phenomenon and a universal principle of language change. The truth is that you actually combine all of these together. And let me show you with a digression and a small example of how, you know, this social climbing and the status of a particular group of speakers of a language in a society influences the language change, etc. So I would be really, you know, surprised if some of you saw this in real life. So this is the 800 pages of the earliest surviving Christian Bible. So it's called Codex Sinaiticus. There was a whole documentary by BBC about it. Some of these fragments in this Christian Bible come from the 4th century. So this is actually a very, very expensive and valuable book that was sold on eBay for an amazing amount of money, but now it was scanned and it's available on codexsinaiticus.org, the website. So this is 1600 years old. And my question is, so this is the earliest Christian Bible from the times of the Roman Empire, when the Roman Empire accepted Christianity as the official religion. In what language was this Bible written? Unmute yourselves. Tell me, do you know? Come on, come on.
Latin.
That's what I thought as well, but it wasn't Latin.
Hebrew?
Sorry?
Was it Hebrew?
Because Jesus was a Jew. No, it
I'm
wasn't.
guessing no.
No, it wasn't. Any other ideas? It's really weird. Did you watch Greek? Very accurate. But there's another topic there. Did you watch the movie with Mel Gibson, The Passion of the Christ? Oh, Olga is just whispering to me that I'm an idiot, that it's not actually with Mel Gibson. He only directed it, and she's right. So it was so it's The Passion of the Christ, but it's only directed by Mel Gibson. He doesn't have a role in the movie. But the movie won several Oscars. So do you remember, if you watch the movie, in what language that Jesus actually spoke?
Aramaic, I think.
So Jesus was a Jew, but he didn't speak Hebrew. He spoke Aramaic. In one of the provinces of the Roman Empire where the official language was supposed to be Latin. And yet his disciples and his, followers, early Christians, they wrote the Bible in neither Latin, Aramaic, or Hebrew. They wrote it in Greek, ancient Greek. And the explanation there is actually what only historical linguistics can unravel as a story. So actually, Aramaic was spoken by the Jewish population after the Exodus. So I don't know if you can see this, and I'm not sure if you will be able to hear the song here. Yeah, this is a common problem on my PC. So it usually works when I have, when I'm not streaming, but for some reason, I guess copyright prevention, they don't allow me to play the actually to play the videos in PowerPoint, and when I'm streaming, videos don't work. But I can maybe change that because Google is actually the owner of YouTube. And the video which I inserted in my presentation is actually from YouTube. I'm just trying to find it. Don't worry, I'm doing something. You just can't see it. Okay, so here it is. Let me just try to share my screen now with, let me try to share my browser with you. I think you should be able to see it. So I hope you can hear the music. Okay, start singing. Okay, I hope you heard that. You know the song, I'm pretty sure of that. The disco hit, you know who wrote the lyrics for this song? Did you ever pay attention to the lyrics? The lyrics are actually by God. If you believe in God, the lyrics come from the Bible. So I put here God, beginning of time. That's like, I'm referencing God's work. So it's from Psalm 137. It says, by the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. That's actually Bonnie M's song. There on poplars we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs, our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skills. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. That's not all in Bonnie M's song, only the first couple of verses are there. But that's actually what the Hebrew-speaking population, the Jews in exile in Babylon, were saying about, their roots in Jerusalem. Unfortunately, they did not keep their promises. Only 100 years after the Exodus, most of the Jews, actually 98% of the Jews, forgot Hebrew and they switched to Aramaic. That's why Jesus spoke Aramaic, because that was the language of Babylon. And when Romans invaded Babylon, they found it easier to conduct local business in Aramaic because that was the language that was used there. They only translated some documents in Latin, and rich people were taking Latin classes, but most of the people in the streets, they still spoke Aramaic. And by the way, this is an amazing story that we don't have time to talk about, but how did the Hebrew language then survive? When you go to Jerusalem, you will hear Hebrew these days. It's the biggest story of language revival in the history of mankind. So the Hebrew language was preserved by rabbis, and the rabbis kept it unchanged for more than 2,000 years. And the language that you hear today in Jerusalem is actually like a time travel. That's the only language that hasn't changed a little bit in 2,500 years. If you could somehow take these people from the Bible that we're talking about, not forgetting the language of Zion, they would be able to do their business in Jerusalem today because it's the same language. There's no other story of language revival like that. So the language was preserved unchanged for 2,500 years. The reason why it was written in Greek, actually, the Bible, was that Greek in the Roman Empire it was what English is today in Europe. It's like the common language for business, legislation, art, culture, news. Although we have Brexit, the European Commission, the European Parliament, they still, do their joint declarations and laws in English first, and this will stay even when England leaves, the UK leaves. The Greek language was actually the universal language of art, culture, theater, poetry, and education. So rich Roman kids were taking Greek classes and they were learning how to do their speeches in Greek, just like we are now teaching our kids how to speak English. So Greek was the English of ancient times. That's why the Bible was in Greek, because actually more people who mattered spoke Greek than Latin. The richest, most influential, most celebrated people wrote in Greek even. So that's actually a story. This is just one insight into what historical linguistics has to tell you about the development of languages. But let me then just very briefly introduce you to some modern theories of language change, and in 17 minutes we will end this lecture. And I will then, as I promised, upload the PDF version of these slides. So the modern theories are that they actually looked at all the theories that I presented to you. They discarded the racial and similar, idiotic theories. And then they classified what made sense into two large groups. And they said modern theories of language actually have internal and external causes of language change. So modern theories distinguish between internal and external causes. External causes are language contact causes. So this is, for example, when those Danish kids, 130 years after British soldiers left, they sing Jack up Jill went up the hill and jug bell after. So that's language contact, and it's encoded in language. It's eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Why we use it in English? Because it's actually Celtic, and early Anglo-Saxons, they hired Celtic, what's the word for a woman who takes care after your kid? Nannies, yeah, nannies. So they hired Celtic nannies, and Celtic nannies, they use some nursery rhymes from the Celtic languages. So those are external causes, language contact. Internal causes are, for example, physiological changes in the speech apparatus, which is not very often that this happens. Humans do not evolve so rapidly. But the most internal causes are cognitive or psychological. So this is what we mentioned, that young people innovate, then young people have kids of their own, and those kids acquire the new innovative forms of their parents. But some of it has to do with production and processing of language, in the sense that language is an adaptive, optimal system that tries to be efficient and to get rid of exceptions. So I have also in the slide what I just said, that external changes are due to language contact. That's, for example, the Anglo-Saxons invading the British Isles, as exemplified in this photo, which briefly appeared. So I don't have some time to show you some slides that are about, possible experiment, also because Google Meet doesn't allow us to do quick polls. So I will simply go to the fourth and the final concern of historical linguistics, and that's to describe the history of speech communities. You heard some of it already from my story about Jesus Christ and Hebrew speaking Jews that quickly became Aramaic speaking Jews, how that influences vocabulary, how that influences style or genre. So this is mostly about documenting language contact over history. And actually, language retains some information that tells you about the habits, politics, religion of previous generations. So Serbian population is generally considered to be predominantly Christian. We have only one God. It's the Holy Trinity of God, Son, and the Holy Ghost. And then why do you say that, for example, in Serbian, namučio sam se do zla Boga? How can this, good God be an evil God? Zašto se kaže do zla Boga? Well, historical linguists of Serbian will tell you that this is a remnant of Slavic religions, where you had good and bad gods, like in Greek mythology. So even in the present day, let's say Serbian language, you have some expressions that retain the history of the speech community. So whenever you say do zla Boga, you are actually using the phrase that was quite common at the time when the Slavic tribes were not Christian, but they believed in Perun and other Slavic deities. So this is another concern of historical linguistics. And this concern of historical linguistics, as I mentioned, gave rise to historical sociolinguistics. You may have heard of this person, William Labov. He's one of the most famous linguists these days. He explained, for example, how languages change in different situations, how somebody who's poorly educated, you know, guy from New York, when he gets a job to work in, you know, like a prestigious designer clothes store, how this person will change his language to accommodate the language of his clientele, and then will also influence his kids to speak that variety of the New York English. There's actually also a fifth concern of historical linguistics, but only in the obligatory reading, which I mentioned that you have on the website. So that's Campbell's Historical Linguistics book. Most people consider that this is a separate branch of linguistics. So this fifth concern of historical linguistics is etymology. So etymology nowadays is considered to be a separate branch. Originally, it was part of historical linguistics. So, you know, you know, you is actually, you know, a sheep. So it's the least interesting from modern perspective, because we know virtually everything there is to know about the etymology of every single word in every single relevant language. So this is you know, I just mentioned it. You can also mention this if in the question of concerns of historical linguistics, but fundamentally, you know, there are four main and etymology. So to sum up, to observe, describe, and account for changes in particular languages, reconstruct the history, determine the relatedness, and group languages into families. But this is more done. There's nothing new to add here. Theories about why languages change, this is the relevant topic for the present day. History of speech communities, still relevant, and etymology, which is about history of words, which is mostly considered to be a separate branch of linguistics. So fundamentally, historical linguistics deals with language change. It's the study of language change. And before we split, because we have 9 minutes remaining and there was a notification that there should be practice classes, but today we have nothing to practice, so we won't have practice classes, yippee or boo, but we don't have it today. One important thing is to consider is this is a new idea in historical linguistics. How do you measure changes in languages? How do you measure, I mean, what's the unit of measurement for changes in historical linguistics? So this is about time, and the unit or scale that you use to measure time that it takes for a change to happen in languages. If you think about, you know, duration of language change, you would normally say, okay, we can measure it in years. But a year as a unit of measurement is based on Earth's revolution around the sun. What we are dealing with here has nothing to do with the revolutions around the sun. This is not a physical phenomenon that we are dealing with. Language is a cognitive phenomenon. So I will turn on my camera in a moment. Just give me a second. I don't know if you can see me, but this is toilet paper. These are several rolls of the toilet paper. And it shows the age of Earth. So it starts with Earth is formed 5 billion years ago, and then, you know, I could roll it out, but I cannot do that because my flat is not big enough. The question is, you know, this is measured, this is years as a measurement. All human history, when you unroll this, and I'm really sorry that we cannot do this in class, because it takes actually 3 lengths of the classroom to unroll this. These are 3 rolls of toilet paper joined together. Human history is 1 millimeter on the end of the last piece of the toilet paper. All of human history, everything we did, even when we, didn't have books, when we just became Homo sapiens, that's human history in comparison with the age of the planet. We are 1 millimeter line on a stretch of paper that goes over 3 classrooms. So obviously, we should not use something that is based on physics. So most linguists, historical and sociolinguists and historical sociolinguists these days say that we should use a unit that is sociologically based, something that is, let's say, innately human. Many linguists, this is still not a standard, but many linguists these days say that maybe the best measurement unit for language change should be a generation. Generation is roughly 25 years. So this is actually what I was telling you about. So you're a young person, you have your own idiolect, you create some new fancy words, maybe you create a new grammatical construction that sounds cool and different from your old-aged parents, and then you have kids of your own when you are, let's say, 24. And then your baby starts acquiring language, and later, this baby of yours starts speaking this variety of yours, and then your baby grows up, you become, grandfather, grandmother, and your, grandchildren, they actually take it as a normal, what your generation considered a completely new and fancy word or expression. So they say that usually a language change requires 3 generations. 1 generation that innovates, 1 generation that takes the innovation and decides whether it will become part of the standard language, and the 3rd generation that then cements the language change and you have a new thing in language. So that's actually what I have to say about historical linguistics and language change. Before we leave, I will just I would like to let you know that the hottest topic in this domain is actually historical sociolinguistics. So there are handbooks of historical sociolinguistics. You cannot see my slides, sorry. The hottest topic these days is historical sociolinguistics. So it's a sub-branch, or now almost a separate branch of linguistic study that actually analyzes strictly sociological phenomena that causes language change. Migrations, contact, hierarchy in the society. And this is actually a very, very good branch of linguistics also for scholarships. It's interesting that there's even a network of historical sociolinguistics. When there's no corona, they have very nice summer schools, for example, in Lesbos, in Greece, or in some Italian islands like Sardinia. And there are many, many great books, and they even give scholarships to students from non-EU countries, and you can get there for free and spend 2 weeks on Lesbos or Sardinia. And there are many books on this by Peter Tradgill and also William Labov, etc. But we will actually have 2 lectures that deal with sociological factors in language change. So that's it from me for today. We will see each other next week. If the recording is not okay, I will then investigate what went wrong with Google Meet. And I will do everything necessary for the next class to go smoothly and for you not to have blurry screens. But as I mentioned, it worked on Thursday, so I don't know what's wrong today. We have 2 or 3 minutes remaining. So again, the screen is yours. Unmute yourselves, ask something, whatever you want regarding the course, of course, or related to the course or studies or something like that. Anybody? I will look at the chat window. Nobody. There's something called a 5-second rule. So if there's a silence for 5 seconds and nobody interrupts the silence, then there's nothing left to say or ask. And you didn't ask anything. So I hope that then you actually could follow the slides. But I hope that if you couldn't, you will be able to watch the recording or speed up the recording. I speak slowly, so you feel free to speed me up. And I will upload the presentation to the website, and I will put the links to the recording, which will be on YouTube. Google Meet uses YouTube engine to record the meetings. So you will have also YouTube lecture. So thank you. See you next week. And next week we will also have practice. I will upload the material, the PDF and MS Word document for practice to Google Drive, maybe even today, maybe tomorrow. The problem is that you're supposed to write something during practice. So I will try to, create editable Word documents, but sometimes, it's better if you can print it out. I know that maybe you don't have printers, so that's why I will try always to make editable link. Okay, I will send you the link to the website. Just give me a second. So this is the link. You have it in the chat. Click on it, bookmark it. I will send it also as email, in the email, so that you have it there as well. So I will not end the lecture now, so that you have a minute to find the link in the chat session and click on it. But after a minute, I will stop talking and stop recording, and then we will definitely say goodbye. So once more, I would like to thank you for choosing this course. I will do my best to, walk you through everything you need to prepare for the exam, to show you some cool things that historical linguistics discovered, like these things with Jesus and Hebrews forgetting the language, the first Bible in Greek, not Latin, Ini, Mini, Mini, Mo. We will have many similar, anecdotes that I hope you will find entertaining, informative, and good for your general, education. These are good talking points at a nice, garden party with some fine people. But also you will be ready to do the exam and pass with flying colors. Okay, the minute is up. I hope you all managed to click on the link, open the website and bookmark it. That's it for me. I'm stopping the recording now, officially. So